A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. At that time, John said to Jesus, "Teacher, we saw someone driving out demons in your name, and we tried to prevent him because he does not follow us." Jesus replied, "Do not prevent him. There is no one who performs a mighty deed in my name who can at the same time speak ill of me. For whoever is against us, whoever is not against us is for us. Anyone who gives you a cup of water to drink because you belong to Christ, amen, I say to you, will surely not lose their reward. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him if he tied a great millstone around his neck and cast himself into the sea. For if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It's better for you to enter into life maimed than with two hands and go into Gehenna, into the unquenchable fire. And if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It's better for you to enter into life crippled than with 2 feet and be thrown into Gehenna. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. It's better for you to enter into the kingdom of God with 1 eye than with 2 eyes and be thrown into Gehenna. For there the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched." My sisters and brothers, the Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, I gave you due warning that it wasn't exactly the happiest gospel that we've ever heard proclaimed. But it's an important gospel nonetheless, and thank God as Catholics we don't take the Bible literally. Because if we did take it literally, I'm not about you, but there'd be some people in this congregation who wouldn't have a hand, wouldn't have an eye, wouldn't have a foot, and might have to tie a millstone around your neck and jump off Picnic Point this afternoon. We don't take the Bible literally, except we seemed once upon a time to take that part of today's gospel about hell, Gehenna, being the unquenchable fire, and there would have been redemptorists in the pulpit in this cathedral for decades and decades who terrified people about the fires of hell. Gehenna was the tip of Jerusalem. Most of us don't know that. And the Toowoomba tip when I was a boy had an unquenchable fire. It just kept smouldering and going and going. And you just put more stuff on top of it. I think there's a housing estate there, which is probably poisoning people, but that's another story. But the Toowoomba tip never went out, and nor did Gehenna, the tip of Jerusalem. So it's a metaphor. The whole gospel is metaphorical. But Jesus does underline in this gospel how important it is that we practice what we preach. And so the church, for the 106th time, gives us Refugee and Migrant Sunday to think about how we practice what we preach. And Pope Francis, in writing to all of us this week, says that if we're going to do something about refugees and migration, we have to move from them and they to us and we. We have to see these people who are moving in fear of their own lives as our brothers and sisters, one family under God. I'm more than aware at how contentious, how polarising, how difficult this topic can be, especially in our own country. But Pope Francis reminds us that once we befriend refugees, once they become people we know and care about, all of a sudden it changes the discussion. Think Billawheeler. Who could have imagined that Billawheeler could become one of the great advocating towns for a refugee family? Think Afghanistan. It would be difficult. You've got the hardest of hearts if none of us are moved to think of the women and children that are going to suffer under that despicable regime for decades to come, and they might seek to come here to be with us. All I can say is the Pope was right. Once refugees become your friends, it totally changes the way you address the topic. So I want to tell you the story of the first refugee that I had ever met. I met him at the University of Queensland when we were both studying there. I was doing arts law, he was doing medicine. Let me tell you about Huyn van Maar. He's one of 10 children. And in 1978, his parents had to decide which one of their children they would pay to a people smuggler to get them on a boat out of the communist dictatorship in Vietnam. They knew that they could be sending their child to their death on the South China Sea. But at 4 a.m, a knock came at the family home, and Ma, the eldest boy, said his goodbyes, was blindfolded and travelled in the back of a truck for 8 hours. He was led through the jungle to a beach where the blindfold was removed. At this moment, evil traders who collected the money and, having no intention of dispatching a boat, often shot the human cargo. That families never heard from their children again didn't come as a surprise to them, knowing the great risks that were involved. Ma told me we were lucky. We made it off the beach. But there were 29 adults in a boat built for 10 people. Inadequately prepared for the 2-week trip, all the people were sick, hungry and exposed. Later that week, Thai pirates attacked their boat, executed 3 men on the spot and raped every woman on board. They were to bury another 6 people at sea who died from exposure. On sighting land, the remaining 20 people in Ma's boat thought hope had finally arrived. But in 1978, the Malaysian Navy were under orders from their government to fire on all Vietnamese boats and send them back out to sea. Ma told me in 1981 that as they went back into international waters, I almost lost my faith in God and in humanity. I was looking at that open ocean and looking at my grave. 2 days later, the boat began to take water, and thank God, a Dutch trading ship rescued them and deposited them in the Philippines. As some of us remember, Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser opened up our immigration program in 1979, and Ma emigrated to Australia 12 months later, settling in Brisbane. Ma did medicine at the University of Queensland, and a couple of years after he graduated, he took a job as the local doctor in a remote rural community in New South Wales, which had been unable to get a doctor for 5 years. He's still there. Ma sponsored all of his brothers and sisters to come from Vietnam to Australia. All of them are magnificent contributors to our country. One of them, Trung, his brother Trung, has become a priest. And Trung is now the parish priest of a large country town in rural New South Wales that used to have 4 parishes and 6 priests. It has 1. Now let's get clear about these people, my friends. They paid people smugglers. They got on a boat, and there were plenty of people, as I remember, in 1979 who didn't want them to come here. I don't think Ma's patients or Trung's parishioners would think of them as them and they. I think they'd only think of them as us, grateful for a doctor and a priest who will go where some Australian-born people now will not. When this pandemic and crisis is over, we hope that we will be extremely generous again to refugees throughout the world, 60 million of them fleeing persecution in our world right now. You never know, we could be welcoming in a much-needed doctor or a much-loved priest to some places that some won't go. Pope Francis challenges all of us in the church today, to demand of our politicians a manageable, orderly, but generous refugee program that's marked by 2 great Catholic virtues: compassion and justice. For the Pope has reminded us in regard to refugees that when we make our final journey, our final pilgrimage home to God, and God calls us to account for how we looked after the widow, the stranger, and the orphan, that we will not be able to say to God, we were ignorant of their plight, or that we were impotent to do anything about it. Pope Francis challenges all of us again to mirror on earth right now the generous, extraordinary welcome we hope to enjoy in heaven. Heaven which is promised to all, irrespective of where any of us have been born. It's a question of who our friends are and who we hear and listen to. The Lord hears the cry of the poor. Blessed be the Lord. The Lord hears the cry of the poor. Blessed be the Lord. I know this isn't easy for some of us. I know this polarizes our community. But if Jesus is to be believed in today's gospel, we can say we love God and our neighbour all we like. But if we don't practice it personally and as a nation, Gehenna awaits.